So yeah, all about social enterprises in 15 minutes. It's a little bit overambitious. So I'll just actually try to focus on things that probably are core to the Legal Justice and Development Week, and focus on the definition of social enterprises as a sector and various challenges related to the legal frameworks and policies surrounding social enterprises. One, I would like to start by why they are important at all. As you all well know, there are huge challenges reaching the bottom of the pyramid poor, and we see that 1 billion people remain below the poverty line, and in many cases it's because they fail to be reached through basic service provision and get services like water, sanitation, education that would set them on a different development trajectory and enable them take their own lives in their hands and promote their livelihoods and well-being. Governments work hard to try to deliver those services, but especially in developing countries, they often lack capacity and resources to reach the base of the pyramid. We also know that businesses, profit-generating businesses, definitely have the capacity and technology to reach these people, but because they're poor, because they're unable to pay, there are market failures, and businesses are not moving into this new market frontiers, and we have 1 billion underserved people in the world, and potentially even more disenfranchised population in developed countries as well. So while we're seeing this persistent government and market gaps, we also see that new forms of businesses are moving into pushing the market frontier with innovation and new poverty solutions. And the common term that is now being used are social enterprises. So who are social enterprises? They're generally understood being triple bottom line organizations. So various types of organizations that are trying to achieve economic sustainability or profit while maximizing their social and economic benefit and environmental benefits. So it's actually sounds much better than it's in real life, because it's a very, very tough balancing act, trying to reach profits and at the same time develop effective, innovative solution reaching the base of the pyramid in conditions of very tough markets, inability to pay, government constraints, very tough competition, often unfair competition. So we see these big movements of social entrepreneurs. We also see a lot of their constraints, and a lot of organizations are trying to move into this agenda and trying to understand how to support these organizations. So far, they're often acting alone. For example, Living Goods, it's a for-profit organization in Africa. The mission, the objective of the organization is to reach rural populations in Africa with affordable, high-quality medicine and health services. And they work with community-based workers who they enable to deliver those high-quality services and products to the poor. They achieved impressive results. So just for under $2 per year per family, they reduced child mortality by 25%. This is a dramatic result that we are failing to achieve at the World Bank through some of our projects. At the same time, they're financially sustainable, and they create livelihoods and they improve income for the community-based workers who they serve, and often those are women. But at the same time, this type of organizations remain below the radar of development organizations, of the government, because there is no legal definitions. They are these blended models. They operate as firms, sometimes as NGOs, community-based organizations, but there is no common denominator. And in the absence of legal or at least operational definition, they remain unknown and untraceable for the development community. We know there are thousands of them. We at the bank, at the World Bank Group, know that because the Development Marketplace program, which is a part of my group that I'm leading, funded social enterprises and worked with the social enterprises for the last 18 years. And we, through the World Bank program, funded and supported more than 5,000 of them. We funded 1,200, and then we provide also capacity development support, policy dialogue, assistance, and so on. But we also know that there are millions around the world. So, for example, a recent study by the British Council in South Asia demonstrated there are 2 million social enterprises in India and potentially 3.5 million in South Asia. So it's a huge constituency that is falling through the crack of development organizations. There are many different partners that are coming into this agenda. There is academia like Stanford and Harvard that are forming social entrepreneurship hubs. There are numerous development agencies. The World Bank is just one of them, and we're just one of the programs within the bank working on this issue. For example, tomorrow there will be a session discussing the human-centered business model as a new concept that will help to put together a framework around different businesses that have social and environmental mission at heart, and discuss the principle that could guide the delivery of this business models. So, in conclusion, what I would like to focus on is a few challenges that could help promote a more conducive business environment for social enterprise, social entrepreneurship, and help achieve results, and potentially also leverage them as a new way of addressing the SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal challenges. I think there would be fantastic if we could work with partner organizations to define the concept and then start understanding who is the community, start engaging with the community of social enterprises globally, and also start motivating the community to self-organize and engage themselves. And the reason behind it is that social enterprises is such a varied set that it's very difficult to set quality standards behind their function. And when we're talking about service delivery, obviously quality standards become very important for quantifying results, for understanding value, and for tracing development impact. So setting up principles and systems behind quality standards would require a lot of collaboration between different industries, but also a lot of public-private dialogue with social enterprises. And just as conclusion, I would like to say that this is kind of a fantastic forum, which is, I think, one of the first times that we at the bank are bringing in business principle in the discussion of kind of legal aspects of the framework. And I think more and more of this blended approaches to development is coming up on the agenda, which I think also will give rise to more of this hybrid and blended models like social enterprises. Thank you.
Hi. I've got an immediate question for you.
Sure.
What makes a business not a social enterprise? So, I mean, to me, most businesses, if I were to run a business, I'd want to make sure that it is, of benefit to its society and the environment. If you're providing a service, you can always argue that it's of some benefit to society and hopefully not damaging to the environment. So, how would you not define a social enterprise?
That's a good question. So I think the core objective is quite important. So most of the profit-driven businesses have profit maximization as the core mission. In fact, for example, in the US, if you have a corporate and you have shareholders, your core responsibility as the CEO is to maximize profit for your shareholders. So actually the social impact or environmental sustainability come at the expense sometimes of profits. And in the US, CEOs in the companies could be liable for reducing profits and increasing social or environmental value. So in fact, in some countries, it's quite difficult for normal businesses to be acting as social enterprises, where the core focus is on achieving social or environmental objectives, and the financial sustainability comes as an afterthought. Second aspect is that many social enterprises, actually, because they're not profit-driven, they are committed for value redistribution. And value redistribution also comes either in reinvestment of their own businesses or in a more participatory approach in running the organizations. Often the communities are participants in organizing and delivering on the social enterprise mission, and the profit or revenues are redistributed within the community. So I think the guiding principles behind the business models could be quite different. At the same time, as I think I agree with you that in some contexts it's very difficult to delineate between businesses and social enterprises. For example, if there is living good that I mentioned, working in poor communities, they're making profit, but it's very difficult to understand how much more profit they would be making if they were not social enterprises. This is a question we routinely ask social entrepreneurs, especially we run competitions and challenges. And so in the final rounds, often we go and we ask social entrepreneurs who are presenting their model, they're like, what makes you a social enterprise? And very often the response we receive, they're saying we wouldn't be in that business at all, because it's actually a very, the cost of time and resource investment in working with the base of the pyramid and very poor people is very high. The barriers of entry are very high. And so there is an opportunity loss for them in terms of profit generation, but they're still going for a particular market segment because they feel it's important.
So it's kind of the direction of the market segment. The other question is, can large corporations be social enterprises? For example, IKEA, it's committed to going 100% renewable energy. It's founded on relatively social and environmentally friendly practices. Would one be able to define such a large corporation as a social enterprise?
So we wouldn't, as part of our definition, because we really feel at the bank that the importance of the social mission as a core objective of the organization is very important for the definition of social enterprise. Otherwise, it's basically anyone who is doing any public good as a social enterprise. So let's say there are tons of pharmaceutical companies producing vaccines. Are they life-saving vaccines? Yes. Are they social enterprises? Probably not, because often they make even unfair amounts of profits on their customers. So I think the fact that the core objective of organization is to promote public good, environmental or social, is quite critical as a core principle.
No, very interesting. And have you got any examples of social enterprises that kind of started small but then grew really huge and kind of lost their social enterprise tag, or would they keep it forever?
So interesting. We've never removed the social enterprise tag. I think we more kind of became conscious of not highlighting or putting spotlight on some social enterprises. I actually don't want. So I don't think it's a negative thing to start as a social enterprise and move into socially and environmentally responsible business areas. So that just to start with that I don't think it's a bad thing to do that. We've seen quite a few. So let's say Fab India. It's a social enterprise. It's an organization that started as a social enterprise in India. I think they still brand themselves as a social enterprise because they source their products in local communities. They work a lot with community enabling services. They train workers and artisans in India to improve the quality of their products. But in many cases, it's more just common business sense, like just good artisanal production from India pays, and it has a good market. I would, by now, move them more into the area of socially responsible firm rather than social enterprise per se. But I don't think I think it's just one of the part of growing up. There is a certain ceiling, and sometimes it's kind of a glass ceiling, on the growth of social enterprises. It's actually very difficult to grow if you reinvest your profits into your own constituencies, because you do need a certain degree of capitalization. You need to go for commercial loans to be able to grow dramatically, and often commercial loans are not available if you don't maximize profits but social goals. So I think as part of the growth strategy for some social businesses, there is that part of moving into the commercial area. But the question is, and we've never quantified it, do they then start achieving more social impact because they just grow, right? I mean, would they achieve more social impact if they remain small but focus only on social? Or do they achieve more social impact when they grow large and social is a side of their business, but it might be potentially much larger than if they remained a small local social enterprise? So I think it's an interesting debate agenda.
I'd like to open it up for some questions. So we've got a question here at the back.
Thank you. The triple P, corporate social responsibility, don't you think it would be just fair for us to incorporate it and tuck it in probably credit ratings and reputation of companies to encourage them to probably not look at profit per se, just profit, financial profits, but other profits, the places, the people, environment. Don't you think, because for now it's like optional, it's not an obligation for companies to have their bottom line, the PPP. So I'm just suggesting that wouldn't it be fair for an institution like the World Bank to tuck it in the credit ratings of those companies? In the case where you have your bottom line PPP, in that case you have higher credit ratings, which gives you higher reputation and gives you probably stronger responsibility towards your bankers and things like that. It's a question or a suggestion I'm trying to make. Try to look at it as a World Bank and see whether it will be encouraging to incorporate people, places, and profits in the projects of companies, not only profits. You understand what I mean?
Yes, so the World Bank Group, the World Bank doesn't work with private entities, right? The IFC is our branch that works with private investors. I can't, to be honest, answer that question because I think there are complex considerations going into the definition of the framework of engagement. The World Bank obviously is extremely careful on safeguards and fiduciary and procurement aspects of our work. So we are very careful in terms of our own practices and who we engage with, but we can't impose to the countries standards that they have not discussed and internally addressed. I think the important point to be raised is how we can help promote public-private dialogue in developing countries to improve business practices and make them more environmentally and socially sustainable. That's definitely a role that the World Bank takes very much at heart.
Thank you. If we have one more question, we'll take that. Otherwise, I still want to quiz you on this social enterprise because I find it fascinating. So clean technology, for example, you know, solar water heaters or electric mobility, all these things that will help us build a low-carbon, resilient future. Those companies, would they automatically become social enterprises because they're selling the right product?
It's interesting you ask. So in the unit where I'm sitting now, we have InfoDev program, and it has the climate change platform as part of our activities. And this is a debate we deal with quite a lot. And I think to the environmental sustainability, there are many aspects. One is companies or innovations that lead to increased environmental sustainability. So they actually provide solutions that will generate improved environmental income. So it could be, you know, the local deforestation management techniques and surveillance using drones, which we've seen examples of that, or even more simpler things where you have a shared generator to decrease impact on the environment from pollution. So we've businesses that have as, again, core metric of their success the generation of environmental benefits would probably be social enterprises. Now, if you install solar panel panels to power your plant because you in sub-Saharan Africa and access to grid network is not available and solar is the only energy that makes sense in that part, I wouldn't qualify the enterprise as social. It just, they use green technologies as part of the doing business principles, but again, I don't think it would be the social. So it's the, how to say, I think it's a very permeable line, and that's also why I mentioned that I think it would be really important for us to have more clarity on the definition of social enterprises and much more agreement among different stakeholders, because we'll be hitting those questions again and again and again, absolutely, and it's unavoidable.
One last question, please.
Hi, I was wondering what kind of economic incentives exist for people to create these social enterprises. Like you talked about loans that don't really exist right now for businesses that don't maximize profits. Do you see those emerging, or do you think there is something that needs to be made for social enterprises?
So now I need another hour, sorry. No. So we've just recently conducted a review. It's not a very thorough review of 40 country practices on incentives for social enterprises. I would say just economic and policy incentives, right, a variety of things. So actually, if you take the look at the most advanced examples, though the South Korea, US, and UK, and they have three quite different approaches actually on how they promote social enterprises. And I'll just talk about that, but if you're interested more, I'll provide you additional information. So on the UK, one of the core drivers was to integrate social entrepreneurship as part of the public service delivery system. So the country really set up the Social Enterprise Council at the highest level, and over about 20 years they experimented with various types of incentives for social enterprises, both stimulating the creation of social enterprises through grant, capacity development support programs, tax incentives, education system that promotes social entrepreneurship as part of the curriculum, and so on. And they have a flourishing social entrepreneurship field. In Korea, the focus was on employing low-income people. I think it's more mixed result. They're actually moving more into more all-encompassing approach, because the economic stimulus was to employ lower-income people or people with disabilities, disadvantaged populations. It definitely worked on creation of social enterprises. I don't think it worked that well on sectoral growth. So it's very kind of public-driven, supply-driven stimulus. That's my just personal opinion. In the US, there is a variety. So again, tomorrow I'll present briefly on the research we've done on legal definitions, including of social enterprises in 5 countries, including the US. And at state levels, there are different approaches in the US. And it's interesting how the creation of special forms for social enterprises actually drove the development of additional social enterprise. So they were not less economic stimulus and more of the kind of legal framework stimulus that also gave quite interesting results. But there is much more to say about that, so just tip of the iceberg.
And with that, we'd like to thank you, Natalia.
Thank you.
So you heard it from Natalia Agapitova,
yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
Thank you so much for your time and for enlightening us on social enterprises. And it's actually really inspirational to see that, the private sector is taking this business model as a leading example for transforming the world and having the private sector as one of the leaders in this transition to a low-carbon, resilient future.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.